Greetings and welcome to another lecture in comparative psychology. Now, this particular chapter involves communication. And as someone who has done animal language research, I do want to point out that communication and language are very different things. Or rather, language is communication, but communication is not necessarily language. When we're talking about communication, generally, in non-human animals, we're talking about sending and receiving signals. Now, these signals are not usually considered to be words. There are a lot of rules that human beings basically have put in to say that something is a language. And it includes things like there needs to be symbols that stand for items in the environment, whether these are verbal, the way we generally think of them, or whether they are visual signals, or written or whatever. They need to stand. They need to symbolize the environment, something in the environment. When we say the word dog in English, dog can have any of a number of different definitions, but one of them, of course, is a small to medium-sized, furry, omnivorous mammal, often kept as a pet. And we've agreed that the sound dog, that those phonemes basically stand for that particular thing. That's language. Language is more than just words. Language is also things like syntax. It's word order. We know that there is a difference between the sentence dog bites man and man bites dog. Even though they both use the exact same words, they just are in a different order. They have a very different meaning. There's also the ability in language to talk about things that aren't there at the present time, to imagine things, to think about the future, to think about things in the abstract. We may be able to know what a dog is, but it might be difficult to explain what beauty or honor is. A lot of these things we've basically set up for ourselves. People used to say that animals didn't have a human type language because they don't use words. And then it was shown that animals do use words, not only that they can be taught words, and even a number of language-trained animals show that they understand the concept of a symbol that stands for something in the environment. But also there appear to be some animals that naturally use words. We'll talk a little bit about this as we go on in this particular chapter. And then they said, well, it has to do with syntax, but on the other hand, we can show that some animals can indeed understand word order. And so now a lot of them have backed up into things like, well, unless they can show signs of true abstract thought, to which I basically say, well, then young human children don't have language because they don't necessarily show abstract thought. According to Piaget, we really didn't show much of abstract thought until we were, 11 or 12 years old. So yeah, the discussion / argument goes on. But yeah, I mean, basically communication is an entirely more or less separate thing. Communication can happen between any sorts of individuals. My cat communicates with me, I communicate with him. Is it a language? No. Do we understand each other? Yes. Birds communicate with him in some ways. He communicates with birds in terms of body language, in terms of sound. The birds see him, they chirp, they fly away. I mean, all of these things are communication. Things that we were talking about before with what prey animals might do when they see a predator. One of the things that they might do is approach the predator because that, among other things, lets the predator know that the predator has been seen. That's communication. So, yeah, there is a lot of communication going on. This is actually one of the shorter chapters in the book, probably because if you want to really nail down communication, there aren't necessarily that many examples. I know that I don't have a whole lot of slides here simply because a lot of the chapter is examples. So I'll explain basically the more common examples and also the basic precepts that are going on here, and then you can get much of the rest from the textbook. I do want to point out that communication can indeed take many forms. Communication can be auditory, which is what I'm doing to you right now. It can be visual, which is what you're doing when you're looking here at these slides. It can be tactile. It can involve touch. It can involve vibration. It even can involve chemicals. It can involve taste and smell. So, I mean, all of these things can be involved in communication and sending signals from one individual to the next. There has been a little bit of discussion as to whether or not this communication is indeed, what form it takes. We sometimes think that human beings are the only animals that can lie. That is not the case. Other animals can also communicate things that may or may not be true. And in fact, it's been suggested that some communication may be an attempt by the signaler to manipulate the recipient in some ways. Okay? So basically, they behave in a way to make the individuals think that they're one thing, and when in actuality, they're another. Now, this doesn't always happen, of course, but in the same way that when people talk to one another, we're not always lying to one another. But indeed, this does happen sometimes, in that we can tell when, sometimes we are lying and sometimes we are telling the truth. Remember, communication basically evolved in much the same way that everything else did. We have individuals that have learned to communicate in order to ensure that their genes are the ones that get passed down to the next generation. This is a relatively new way of thinking about this. It used to be thought of that communication is that both parties will benefit, but now we're kind of wondering whether it's just sort of one party benefits. That if I lie to you in such a way that benefits me and it doesn't benefit you, I don't care. It's still going to make me likely to lie because it benefited me. And perhaps if that is in a way inherited, which it probably isn't, but then perhaps my offspring would be more likely to lie to your offspring, although I'd probably have more of them, because if the lying benefits me and not you. So, in a lot of cases, what needs to go on here then, when we're talking about things like communication, that's when the honesty bit comes in. Because this is not only true of animals, this is also true of human animals, in that we have evolved both to lie and to be able to tell when we're being lied to. Okay? So there are a number of techniques, basically, that animals use that you may find also might remind you of what people use when people lie. Sit and think about what it is exactly that people do when they lie. They, for instance, they may have a tendency to sort of exaggerate their behavior in a way to try to force you to believe that they're truthful. For instance, one sign that people are lying is that they don't look at you, they look away. And so some people, when they're lying, since they know that, they make sure to glare at you in such a way that they never take their eyes off you, and that might also be a sign that they're lying. They're overcompensating. Okay? So they're overdoing it. Or, as your book talks about, a salesman trying to sell you something, is going to overcompensate in a way. Now, it may also be when there's, cooperation going on, then you don't have to exaggerate it. And in fact, if I'm cooperating with you and I don't necessarily want other people to know that, I might be very subtle about this. Your book describes the difference between conspicuous display and conspiratorial whispers. And the conspicuous display is when, of course, you're just out there and, making it really big, and it probably means that you're lying. And on the other hand, conspiratorial whispers, you don't want everybody to hear what you're saying, probably because you're saying the truth, and you may not want other individuals to know that, so that this cooperation is not conspicuous kind of thing. So humans, we can fairly consciously figure out whether individuals are lying to us or whether they're not. Other animals may not be able to do that so much. So what they might rely on are the same things that, at least in theory, human lie detectors rely on, which are signals that can't be faked. They're signals that cannot be, that you cannot use them to lie. And in a lot of ways, like I said, that's what human lie detectors are kind of supposed to do. They are supposed to be able to detect whether or not people are lying. Then there are ways to fake lie detectors. Lie detectors aren't perfect. They measure physiological responding with the idea that when people are lying, they respond more physiologically than people who aren't lying, and there are ways to get around that. But still, overall, I mean, they are rather interesting in a way that perhaps our body doesn't lie. And in fact, researchers are looking at trying to create some sort of brainwave lie detector, which is something that we would not be able to lie with. That would be just true and total honesty. And in a lot of cases, non-human animals kind of go that route as well. The way your book talked about, for instance, female frogs, when they're looking for a mate, and one of the big ways that communication works is looking for partners, females prefer larger frogs. And larger frogs tend to have deeper voices. Okay? Because let's say that females produce more offspring when they mate with larger males. So they're looking for the larger males. And so larger males have deep voices. Well, the thing is, smaller males can't do that. Smaller males cannot mimic the deeper croak of a larger male. And so therefore, these croaks that these males are using to attract females are really, really good at telling the truth. Simply because smaller males haven't been able to figure out a way to make their croaks bigger in order to attract females. So in some ways, they are, we're basically going for things that are very, very difficult to fake. Looking at birds, for instance, birds that sing lots of songs tend to indicate that they have better genes, that they have been able to survive. And again, that might not be something that other birds can fake, because they have to have the attributes that allow them to learn these songs, the ability to gather lots of food, the flexibility, that sort of thing. And it might not be something that they can fake. So with communication, one of the things to prevent lying is to basically ask things in such a way that prevent or make it very difficult for lying to take place.